This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner, the Center for Audit Quality, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with Corporate Board Member, and today is our part 2 in our compensation series. And joining us for part 2 is David Chun, who's the founder and CEO of Equilar. And David, last session we talked about executive and director compensation and sort of took a look at that. Today we want to talk about compensation benchmarking and peer group selection.
Sure.
And we know with all the regulations that came out of the SEC, and now we have the CD&A that we have to do. There's regulations with that, and that's always important because sort of like I like to call the computer garbage in, garbage out. So you need to, if you aren't creating good benchmarking or you aren't creating good peer groups, it makes the analysis worthless.
Absolutely.
Okay? So that's why you're here.
Sure.
You're here to talk about that. So let's start with the benchmarking because that's, again, open to abuse. So how does one get their arms around that best?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's you have to start with the correct peer group, right? I mean, with the 20 companies that a company ends up picking, that's critical to making sure that the comp is measured accurately against one's peers. And, there is that suspicions that companies are trying to abuse what they're doing on that. But the data shows that most companies, I mean, you think about the amount of effort that boards are putting into this, their consultants, HR departments. I think, honestly, if you look at this question, it's probably in the hundreds of millions of dollars of effort that is being put in each year trying to figure out who is the appropriate peer, who's the appropriate set of companies to include in one's peer group. And that'll be obviously by the size of the company, and depending on the dynamics in the industry, it could be revenues, it could be market cap, it'll be geography, your competition for talent, the industry that you're serving. So there is, a tremendous amount of effort that goes into this, and it's something that, every analysis starts with that, because you can't, it doesn't matter what the numbers show if you're not starting off with the right set of companies.
Well, everybody likes to say that that's altered by getting in high-paid CEOs into the peer group and stuff like that. So you guys being the fact people on making sure that have been working on this. There's stuff that you've been doing to try and create some reasonableness around these peer groups. Talk a little bit about what sort of your philosophy has been and what you've tried to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share that with everyone. So we've developed what we call our market peers, and we're actually borrowing some of the principles and techniques that you see out in the social networking world. And the ability to do this has been, we're now able to do this because companies are now required to include in their disclosure which companies they've used and they've considered as peers. And so on average, a company will have roughly about 20 companies they'll include in their peer group. And what we have done is we've created a massive network of all the companies and connected all of them based on their peer group disclosure. And so what we have then been able to do is let the market help define who should be in your peer group and who should not be in your peer group. And so there's a couple different layers in how this is created. So we take a company, we look at the companies that they've identified as peers, and then we identify, map out who they've identified. So your peers, who do they include in your peer group? Then we have this concept of what we call an incoming peer. So who includes you in your peer group? And then from based on that data, we look at those peers and who do they consider as peers. And so we basically have drawn, think of this massive map with 5,000 companies and lines going left and right throughout the map. And then we've come up with independent peer groups for each company based on the strength of the network connection. So if Staples, use Staples and Office Depot as an example. Does Staples include Office Depots? Does Office Depot include Staples? Do Staples peers like a Best Buy or TJ Maxx, do they include Office Depot as a peer and vice versa? And so that helps us provide some independent analysis around who should be included as peers, so letting the market data to help define who should be included in peer groups.
Now, that means that there will be some companies that are happy that you do that and companies that aren't. Who right now, who's shown the most interest in the information that you're generating?
Well, interestingly, the institutional investor community, we formed an alliance with the Council of Institutional Investors earlier this year. Also had, shortly after that, announced a partnership with Glass Lewis. And both of them are, Glass Lewis starting July 1st will be using our market peers in their analysis. So when they're doing their pay-for-performance model, rather than using their prior peer group methodology, they're actually going to be adopting our peers. And the CII and their members are using our peers to help them identify, pay-for-performance alignment. But then, so we have the issuer community is also using our tool also. And frankly, the discussion that, when I've had this opportunity to talk about what we're doing with boards, they've actually come back to me and said, I'm glad that there's a tool like this out there because it helps them feel comfortable if they're going to be selecting a peer group beyond just looking at revenues and market cap and whatnot. It helps them validate internally, okay, why are we picking these as peers, and are other companies including us as peers and vice versa. So frankly, the feedback has been positive, even though they may not be happy with the initial set of results, but at least they know that there's a tool out there that looks at independent market data to help them on that.
This isn't a very commercial show, but I do want to make sure that people know where they can get this, because I have a feeling that with the momentum of this, that it is going to be something that issuers and companies feel that they should take a look at, because it'll have an effect. But so just tell the audience how is the best way to find information on this.
Yeah, I mean, we have some reports that we've published internally. We've also have a tool that they can use to go in and see the data and see, okay, who includes ourselves, who includes us as a peer within their peer group, looking at our peers, the strength of the peers that we've selected. So we have all, essentially because we've been tracking all this data for the past several years, we have the tools to help them with that.
And do they go into Equilar.com? Is that what?
Yeah, just come to Equilar.com and request a demo, and we'd be happy to walk somebody. The reports that they can request online also.
Okay, well, I have a feeling, again, just as you talk through that, and if people are starting to adopt that, that's going to be something that people better be aware of, and may give them a little bit of a head start if they know that their institutional investors are using that as a tool.
Yeah, and it's something that I think as a board member, as a comp committee chair, it is a validation tool. So as you're picking, whether you agree or disagree, at least it helps show you what the rest of the market is thinking with regards to peer groups.
While we have you, there's another thing, and we just touched on this lightly, but I wanted to make sure that we had some further discussion on that, and that you've been sort of vocal on this concept of CEO target pay versus realizable pay.
Yeah.
Could you explain again just a little further what you mean by that to our audience?
Yeah. I mean, the thing about executive pay, there's so many different ways to look at it. There's so many different lenses. And what the SEC has mandated as part of disclosure is frankly is a hybrid between what one would consider target pay and realizable pay. And target pay would be based on the plan that's designed, what are you hoping to deliver to that individual over X number of years. So we expect a million shares to be issued and 1 million options and a bonus of $1 million and so on. So you add all those numbers up, it gets you to say $5 million. What ends up happening with target pay is because, in particular about the stock option component, most companies are using Black-Scholes to value those options. And to borrow a quote from CalSTRS, one of our clients, you can't take Black-Scholes to the bank. And if Europe blows up and those stock options are worthless, when at the time of exercise, 3 or 4 years down the road, one can point back and say, well, like if you look at your last 3 years, you made, let's say it was $10 million, but let's say 9 of it was a stock option value that's now all underwater. The executive sitting there saying, okay, well, that's not what I took home. And I think institutional investors and others understand and appreciate that. But with realizable pay is theoretically based on where the stock price is today, what could an executive take home? And that being said, we've seen a number of companies include realizable pay disclosure in their CDNAs this past year. Frankly, there's been a little bit of the definition isn't quite consistent just yet, but you're seeing companies are grasping the concept. They're looking to include it in their disclosure. The institutional investor community understands and appreciates this whole concept of realizable pay, but knowing that it's really the fundamental difference is in target pay with options, you're looking at the Black-Scholes value. With realizable pay, you're looking at the intrinsic value of those options. So what is the in-the-money value associated with that? And if the options are underwater at that point, they'd be valued at zero in the realizable pay model.
Well, that is interesting, and you'd like to believe that if you were the institutional investor in that realizable, you're going to see, again, the fluctuation depending on performance, which meets the criteria of compensation.
It's a realizable pay. It's directly, it helps in this whole pay-for-performance alignment, understanding, the executive can understand, yes, that is theoretically what I could take home. I think one important difference I should point out, in the realizable pay discussion, it does not include options that were exercised necessarily that particular year or over that period, because those options are typically granted 8-9 years ago, right before they're about to expire. So I know I'm kind of getting into the weeds here, but that's something that you want to be careful about when looking at this whole concept of realizable pay.
Well, on part one, I asked you a question that was off of the facts and on to opinion, so I can't let you leave on part two without asking you that.
Sure.
This one's really a general question, but I wanted to ask you, with all your experience, if you were the chair of a comp committee of a public company today, what would you make sure that you sort of had foundationally in place to make sure that you could come to a good place between the shareholder and retaining the executive?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's happening right now, at least on the disclosure side, at least based on what we're reading, we feel like what we're seeing around executive pay is becoming a check-the-box exercise. And I think I would encourage, comp committees and boards and whatnot is to truly feel comfortable that whatever comp plan in place is consistent with the business strategy of the organization. And being able to clearly articulate our goal is to drive revenues, is to gain market share or whatnot, and to make sure that the comp plan is aligned with that. And so I feel that what we're seeing with the disclosure, people are running away from options thinking that, okay, well, it's not performance-based. There's a lot of controversy around that in and of itself, and I don't think a company should necessarily feel afraid to grant options if that is the right vehicle that they should be granting to their executive team. But the other thing that related to this, which I think is important around executive pay, that kind of gets lost in this whole discussion is having the succession plan in place internally. I think a lot of the challenges that we've seen on executive pay, especially around disclosure and the ratcheting up of pay, is organizations that have to go outside their organization to bring somebody in, and the ripple effect that has internally by having to disrupt that. So I think it's important that comp committees are not looking just at the current team, but realizing, okay, what is the going forward plan for the leadership as an organization, and having a deep enough bench to be able to supplement the team going forward.
Audience, you've heard it from a non-biased compensation expert, somebody that really adds value to the show. David, I want to thank you for our two-part series, and I'm not sure that we won't want to have you back again with all that's happening in this space, but thank you for your time. And that will conclude this week's edition and the end of our two-part series on compensation. We hope that you'll join us next week when we take a look at another critical board issue that'll help you be a better board member or better committee member. And we'll see you then.
Great, thank you.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner, the Center for Audit Quality, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.